So now let's go into a more, I would say, theoretical approaches which have to do with real philosophy. I will call Spyridon Rangos and Nicolas Kolonias. Where is Nicolas? Yeah, okay. So I will call you two. I'll sit in the middle. Spyridon, you can sit here. And Nicolas, you sit over there. Of course, when we speak about Ευδαιμονία, which is the Greek word that Aristotle used, I cannot just say happiness. I know it's much more, and I cannot say it in front of you, Spyros. So Spyros is a professor of Greek literature, ancient literature, and philosophy at the University of Patras. And we will discuss with him more, and he will tell us more about the Greek roots of Ευδαιμονία. And then I'll turn to my left hand, and Nicolas, who is a professor at the university in Bangkok, who is teaching philosophy, but I think comparative philosophy.
In relation to the arts, I teach in the
Sorry.
Okay, I teach in the fine arts in Thailand, philosophy.
Fine arts and philosophy, yeah. Okay. So we will move from west to east because it's important for us to remember that everywhere in the world, at all periods of time, people were searching for their answers. So we will start with Spyros, and then we will go on and see a small video that has been prepared by Achilleas over there, Stamatiadis, which comes from Chicago. So that's the program for now, before I move to the east.
Okay. Is that working? Okay. Good afternoon. It's very nice for me to be here and to be with all of you. And we'll have the chance to discuss this quite deep concept of Eudaemonia across west and east. So let's begin with. I'm going to say a few things about how Aristotle precisely makes the problem of Eudaemonia, presents the problem in terms of his own philosophy, which I think has a certain relevance to the present. So let's begin with Aristotle's concept of nature, which is intimately linked with the concept of teleology. Quite interestingly, this is a funny coincidence. Aristotle's own name includes as components ariston, which means best, and telos, which means goal or end. So by a curious accident or chance of history, Aristotle's own philosophy is inscribed in his very name. Now, what that idea is all about? It is all about teleology in nature, not teleology by a transcendent God. And this kind of teleology can be seen in the way natural things, plants and animals, grow, reproduce themselves, mature, and then die. So nature is a principle, an internal principle of change for Aristotle, and it is such because it is what accounts for the formal unity of a body, as well as for the goal of that body, any body. I mean, nature, the nature of a plant is what makes a particular plant the plant that it is, and also what accounts for the growth and maturation of that plant. So there is a final end within nature. Now the problem is that with human nature, which is particularly endowed with reason, the problem is that this is a natural blessing which may also turn by misuse into a curse. And so we're going to come back to that later on. Now, at the beginning of his great work on human conduct, namely the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle begins as follows. I read, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and choice, is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. This is the beginning of the Nicomachean Ethics, and Aristotle ascribes to that view. Now, we may stop and ponder, is that true that everything aims at the good? Do all our actions aim at the good? Obviously not. There are actions that have very bad, even evil consequences. How can one say that everybody and every action and every decision of ours aims at some good? Now, this is the idea that goes back to Socrates, namely the idea that no one is willingly bad. Whatever we do because we think that the end of our action is going to be good. Now, not good in a universal sense, but perhaps good for us. Even the criminal who robs a bank or makes a killing believes at the moment of doing what he or she does that this is something good for him. Now the problem then is that we have to distinguish between what is the real good for us and what is the merely apparent good. And here the problem begins. Now, Aristotle thinks that since everything, as I said earlier, aims at some good, there has to be an ultimate goal, an ultimate end, a supreme good in our life. Why? Because if there is no such a good, an ultimate end, then we would be all stuck in a vicious circle, as we normally, most of us are. Namely, we desire something as a means to an end, which when achieved becomes the beginning of another desire and still another desire, which each desire is either accomplished, fulfilled, or frustrated. In both cases, we get a new desire and so on. So throughout our lives, most of us, we do not conceive of any ultimate end or supreme good in order to guide our lives. So people might say that there is no end in human life. Thus, Aristotle has an answer, or at least two arguments against that view. One is the so-called function argument. And that argument says roughly something like this. We are a complex, each one of us is a complex organism made up of different parts and organic organs of the body. Each of those organs has a function to play. The eye is for seeing. The hand is for handling things. The foot or the leg is for walking. So each of our organs has a particular function to play. Is it conceivable that the whole organism, of which those parts are parts, has no goal, no function to play? And also thinks that this is not conceivable. We are made of parts. Each part has a role, a function, a work to do, but the whole human being has no job to do. The second argument is the following. Universally people around the globe, the past, the present, and the future, have a desire for happiness. Is it possible we seek to be happy? Is it possible that each and every one of us wants to be happy, and still happiness is unattainable? Is it possible? Well, people today, skeptical people might say it's possible. And philosophers, both ancient and modern, have actually said that this is an unattainable end. But for Aristotle, nature does nothing in vain. This is a famous dictum which is Aristotle repeats in several places. Nature does nothing in vain. Now listen, if it is true that nature does nothing in vain, and it is also true that we all by nature seek happiness, it must follow that happiness is something achievable, something perhaps difficult, something perhaps hard to achieve, but still in principle it has to be something attainable. Otherwise, nature would play with us as if we were puppets. So that's the idea. The very desire for happiness is an indication that happiness, human happiness, is something attainable. Now, what I have so far translated as happiness is, of course, the famous Greek word Ευδαιμονία or Eudaemonia, which was a very respected old word, the original meaning of which was prosperity and also good fortune. To be eudaimon was to be wealthy and to have good fortune and to prosper in a basically material sense of the word. But the meaning was it from prosperity, the meaning changed to happiness or well-being, and I would think that already before Aristotle, it had this general meaning of happiness or well-being, and it is due to Aristotle's own theory that the particular meaning of flourishing gets evolved. And this is quite significant, because it is Aristotle's conception of happiness that equates happiness with human flourishing. So Aristotle says that there is a widespread verbal agreement among human beings that the supreme good, the end, the goal, the purpose, the meaning of human life is happiness. People normally agree about that verbally. What they do not agree about, and this is where the great disagreement emerges, is what is the content of happiness? Or, to put it differently, in what does happiness consist? And different people have different conceptions of what happiness is. People, and also Aristotle says that even the same person in different phases of his or her life may have a different conception of happiness. When one is for instance, poor, thinks that wealth is happiness, but when one turns wealthy, rich, but is sick, then, we have to be healthy. That is happiness, to be healthy. So there are different candidates of what happiness is, and Aristotle says that one widespread candidate is that happiness is pleasure, the hedonistic life. Another candidate is that happiness lies in honor, in being an excellent member, socially prominent person in society, and to have a life of use for the society, and the real benefit of that life is honor. And there is another idea which says that happiness consists in getting knowledge, understanding of things. Now, I'm not going to talk about this last bit in this talk, because it's a different thing. I will stick to those two candidates, the life of pleasure and the political life of honor. Aristotle says that pleasure cannot be what human happiness consists in. Why? Because pleasure is something we share with other animals. The pleasures of eating, the pleasures of sexual satisfaction are things that we share with other animals. And when we want to find out what happiness is, we want actually to find out what human happiness is, namely the happiness that is peculiar to us as human beings. Now, in the case of a political life, Aristotle says that there is this problem, that whoever pursues a political life, a political career, and thinks that happiness lies in this, the problem is that he thinks that his own happiness is in the hands of others. Because who procures honor, if that's the end? People, the crowd. So is it conceivable that our own happiness lies in the hands of other people? But Aristotle has to say here something very interesting. Perhaps those people who pursue a political life in terms of honor, what they want to be is to be thought as excellent or virtuous. And therefore, within the political life, namely a life devoted to a community, perhaps the real desire is a desire for excellence and virtue. Now, en passant, I will skip the idea, which is very prominent nowadays, but Aristotle has very few words to say about it, of a life devoted to money-making. And Aristotle says that this cannot be the end, the goal of human life, simply because money is a means, never an end. So we can always ask the question, money for what purpose? So money is a means for some purpose. We need to see what the purpose is. Money cannot be an end. And also, there has to be an intrinsic limit to the amount of money one desires for that particular end. So we will see two definitions of happiness that are provided by Aristotle. The first kind of preliminary definition says that happiness is an activity of the soul that follows or implies reason. We may stop and think about this preliminary definition. First of all, that definition says that happiness resides in the soul, not in the body, nor in external goods like riches, wealth, powerful friends, very nice children. These are external goods. They are goods. They are good things. But it's not where happiness lies. There are also goods of the body. For instance, beauty or health or strength. But happiness is not that. Happiness has to do with one's soul. Second thing, happiness is not a state. It's not a condition of the soul. It manifests itself or is identified with activity. It's a soul's activity. And third, happiness is not any odd activity of the soul. For instance, the activity of a criminal or the activity of a very moral person. Or no, it's an activity that follows reason or implies reason. So in order to achieve happiness, we have to pay due attention to what distinguishes us from other animals, from irrational animals, namely the rational faculty, reason. The final, so to speak, definition of happiness that Aristotle gives says that happiness is a soul's activity in accordance with complete excellence. Now, you may notice that here, the place of reason in the initial definition, the preliminary definition, is taken by excellence. Why? Because if happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with reason, it has to be in accordance with the excellent condition of our rational capacity. And that is why Aristotle says that happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with excellence, namely the excellence of us as rational animals. And now to be rational means to think, to calculate, to be able to solve problems and so on, but also, according to Aristotle, to be a human being is to have desires and emotions, and those desires and emotions and affections may not be rational per se in themselves, but they are rational to the extent that they can be influenced by our rational thoughts. So the thing is that we need to unify our irrational part, the part of emotions, desires, through the rational part, And this is where we become excellent in a moral sense. And what does it mean to become excellent in a moral sense? To be good as a person, as opposed to being good as a mathematician, or being good as a scientist, or being good as any professional in intellectual terms. And so the moral excellences, the excellence of the character, are those stable dispositions for right decisions and noble actions. And those stable dispositions are the result, according to Aristotle, of proper training, not verbal teaching, but a proper training of the emotional and affective part of one's soul through repetition, through habituation, which means through a proper upbringing to begin with, and then through proper self-discipline as an adult. And actually, this is the very well-known doctrine of virtue as a mean. Aristotle thinks that a virtue, an ethical virtue, is always a mean between two extremes. For instance, bravery, courage, is a mean between the extreme of cowardice and the other extreme of fearlessness or foolhardiness. So all ethical virtues are means. But what does that mean? Does Aristotle advise us to lead a mediocre life, a life of mediocrity? Not at all. Because in terms of value, ethical value, the means, virtues, are real excellence, namely exceptional dispositions. And this leads to the flourishing life. A life that is a flourishing life is a life that is in accordance with nature, with the teleology of nature. Why? Because Aristotle thinks that it is by nature that we have reason, and also that it is by nature that we have the disposition to get a good character, to get the moral virtues. Moral virtues are not something we are born with, but nature, our nature is such as to develop the moral virtues. So a flourishing life is a life in accordance with nature. And also it is in accordance with reason, because reason is the distinctive mark of human nature. What Aristotle says or implies is that without moral virtues, reason becomes denaturalized, dehumanized, a mere semblance of itself. Something like detached cleverness, which can be for good or for bad. But with the moral virtues, reason comes to its own, becomes what it is. So a flourishing life is a life engaged in action, but not a restless life. And also, Aristotle says that it is a complete and self-sufficient life. And why is it complete and self-sufficient? Because at any one moment of such a life, the end is there. We're not, a life of flourishing is not a life in which the end is an award of a happy life. It is that very life itself, not something that comes afterwards. When? In the afterlife? At death? Just before death? No, the life itself of flourishing is its own goal. And it is a life of a harmonious whole, of moral and intellectual integration, and therefore integrity. And it is actually, and this is my last word on the issue, on this occasion, a life actually lived in the present. Not a life, I mean, once one has attained a great deal of excellences and acts in accordance with them, then that life is an actual life lived for the sake of the present, and therefore we might have a clue about how we might get out of the vicious circle I was referring to earlier on, namely that we do something, and when we achieve that, we want something else, and we are either frustrated or get satisfied, but then once we achieve whatever we do achieve, we feel empty, and a new goal is set in front of us in an endless circle. For Aristotle, the solution is Evδαιμονία as human flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rangos. I think we should keep the very last 3 lines, you know, where you bring it to the end of what a good life is. But we will continue a little bit. Can you hear me with this? Yeah. We will continue a little bit with a video this time. And this is a conversation between still a young man, almost a student, Achilleas Stamatiadis. Maybe Achilleas, come over. And we will show you a video in a conversation with Professor Giannakidou.
Thank you so much, dear Alexandra, for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here with you. We're going to be watching a conversation with Professor Giannakidou, which is related to a lot of subjects that I also explore in my PhD thesis now as a PhD candidate. And we're going to explore the subject in relation to ideas and notions that have come in play within World Human Forum's agenda, like the Delphi Cube. And just to note a small idea that I would like us all to kind of keep in mind as a keepsake and as something that can remain with us as a notion, is that the concept of Evδαιμονία in Aristotle in the ancient sources seems to also be related to a communal procedure, seems to be related to a procedure that happens in the polis, in the demos. So the happiness of a single individual is also related to the happiness of the community, of the citizenry, of the polis. And I actually find that very, very interesting because, you know, in modern times, we talk about the loneliness epidemic, we talk about the mental health crisis, and a lot of people are speaking about personal growth, personal happiness, kind of finding a personal flourishing. But it's interesting that in the ancient mind, in the politics, and in the Nicomachean ethics, Aristotle actually makes this definition that happiness is a communal process. It's something that happens with the individual in the basis of his participation in the society. And I find that a very interesting idea to think about. So please, let's now listen to the discussion with Ms. Giannakidou.
Hello, everyone at World Human Forum. We're here with Professor Anastasia Giannakidou, who is the Frank J. McLoraine Professor of Linguistics at the University of Chicago. My name is Achilleas Stamatiadis. I'm a doctoral student of philology at the University of Athens, specializing in classical philology. And we will have a wonderful discussion today with Professor Giannakidou pertaining to this year's World Human Forum Symposium in Eleusis on the concept of Eudaemonia. The concept of Eudaemonia and its significance throughout the ages, from the classical times until today. So, Professor Giannakidou, I would like to thank you so much for participating in this discussion, and maybe begin with a question, which is, how can we define the word eudaemonia, linguistically and even philosophically?
Thank you so much, Achilleas, and my great thanks to the World Human Forum for this kind invitation. I wish I could join in person, and this is a way to join in person, at least through my voice and my e-face. I think it's wonderful to have this conversation with you. So let's get started. In Nicomachean ethics, so we will start, with the definition of Ευδαιμονία, Eudaemonia, going to the source, which is Aristotle, Nicomachean ethics. There, Aristotle establishes Eudaemonia as an activity of the soul, ενέργεια της ψυχής, κατά αρετήν τελείαν, so in accordance with virtue. So, eudaemonia is an activity. It is not a passive state. It's an activity that the soul undertakes by pursuing virtue. The Greek word for virtue is areti, and of course, areti and virtue connect to a sense of the good, typically associated with the common good. So I'll come back to that. Now, virtue itself also in Nicomachean ethics is defined as a state of character, okay, which is concerned with choice. In fact, lying in a mean, which is relative to us, relative to a situation, and
You see
it
this
is
connection
defined.
that he makes with the mean and virtue, which is so
Absolutely, yes, exactly. So the virtue connects to a mean that is defined by a rational principle on each occasion where a choice needs to be made. Now, Aristotle's system, therefore, places happiness as rooted in virtuous choice and virtuous action, guided by rationality and always towards the good. So, one of the first passages in Nicomachean ethics, as well as in politics, for example, state that every activity aims towards some form of the good.
Exactly.
And so ultimately we have this link between an activity of the soul, which is what eudaimonia is, through virtue towards the good. And of course, for Aristotle, also eudaimonia is like the ipsis ton agathon. So it's the
the supreme
ultimate,
good, the kind of
exactly, the ultimate good, the ultimate goal, the telos of every human activity. Now, we would think of, linguistically, we would think of eudaimonia as something like happiness, perhaps, or flourishing. For some people, it might be the
I
same
love that
thing.
you connected with this word, because it's so related to this year's symposium as well. By the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. So, and I think actually the word flourishing is a more appropriate rendition of eudaimonia because it has to do, the flourishing is a procedural state. So it's something that changes, flourishing changes, and flourishing is active. It is not passive. We can think of happiness as being the result state of some kind of action, but flourishing is a continuous activity, just like eudaimonia is, and it is something that evolves through time. It is something that can be learned, okay, and it is also something that individuals do, and this is a very important aspect of the Aristotelian definition. Eudaimonia is something that individuals do within a polis. So it is not just a personal pursuit of happiness or the satisfaction of some desire, but it is rather something that one can be taught to do within the confines of the polis.
So would
And
you say that it also has a political aspect then in this regard? And would you say that
absolutely.
Aristotle in a way tries to teach us that, within the realm of politics, when citizens are virtuous, when citizens are educated in the virtues, they can actually also be better citizens and participate in government in better ways?
This is exactly true, Achilleas. The activity can be done and must be done within the polis. And the ultimate goal in politics of the polis is the eudaimonia of the citizens. You cannot have a polis that has a eudaimonia itself without having eudaimonia for its own citizens. And so one of the major goals of the polis is to provide education that will lead to this self-transformation. Okay, so the eudaimonia is an activity of the soul. At a personal level, is a self-transformation that will ultimately fulfill itself within the polis by receiving the type of education needed in order to pursue virtuous action.
Exactly.
And so these three themes already of the World Human Forum are right there. Eudaimonia.
Which we also see in the Delphi Cube, I should also note.
Absolutely.
Where you
Yes,
have
which
the
I
six
think-
sides, including sustainability, education, the arts, the political sphere, and they all connect. And they and kind of the glue that galvanizes the six sides of the Delphi Cube is our common humanity. So would you say that in a similar way, the idea of virtue that Aristotle describes as essential to eudaimonia also connects certain other terms and ideas together to kind of create a bigger picture of what eudaimonia and virtue is?
Yes, this is a great question too. Absolutely, I think virtue is key to understanding how everything in the Delphic cube, which I think is a great tool, by the way. Perhaps we can talk a little bit more about it. The thing that connects is this concept of virtue. And virtue as a political virtue, fulfillment within the polis, but also as a personal pursuit of good choices, rational choices, and also guided by these four aspects. So we see that in Plato and in the history of Eudaemonian virtue later with the Stoics and the Epicureans, and even with more religious thinking. Part of Christianity inherits the theory of virtue. That we have these four aspects of virtue, which are sophrosini, δικαιοσύνη, ανδρεία και φρόνηση, so temperance, courage,
Justice, courage, and
and
wisdom.
phronesis.
And wisdom.
Yes, phronesis, and may I just say that we recently held a conference on phronesis at the University of Chicago. It was an initiative of our Center for Hellenic Studies, which I direct, in collaboration with the French CNRS, the National Institute for Research they have. And we had a great interdisciplinary discussion about phronesis. And I think phronesis as a form of wisdom that is rooted in virtue and the mean, okay, phronesis is this principle that guides action whenever people have to take particular choices. And the action will have to shy away from the extremes and always lead to some kind of moderation, ability to see various sides and be able to go for what is rational and what is beneficial to the many. And so I think it's very important to link virtue to this concept of phronesis. And I think that ultimately, again, virtue and phronesis can be taught. This is a very important aspect of the whole theory of eudaimonia. And even for Plato, it is very clear. For example, there's discussion in Meno where phronesis is actually said to be the ultimate good. And phronesis itself is a kind of exercised knowledge, and it is that type of knowledge that can be taught and that can be practiced through ethical action. And it's something that I think underlies this concept of integration that you guys raise in the question of the cube. In the cube, we have all these different aspects that you very well described, ranging from arts, humanities, sustainability, the environment, and we have all these various aspects. And the question is always balancing between the priorities, and on each occasion, that balancing should be guided by a principle that says that the balancing should lead to decisions that are for the good of the citizen, in this classical sense.
So
And again, the good of the citizen is not something subjective. It's like what makes, or something transient, like what makes me feel good right now. That's not the type of good that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
We talk about the good
it's a much more fundamental and intrinsic notion of what is the good. But would you say that this concept, in essence, also relates to our common humanity? Does it relate to our human nature? Is it something that speaks to all human beings, from even different cultures, from even the Asian culture or the African culture? Would you say that there are common elements, that go across the globe, that kind of refer to our common humanity in relation to eudaimonia? And would a virtuous life lead to a happier life in all those cases?
Yes, absolutely. So eudaimonia, when actually one reads the text, and not just Aristotle, but everything that followed, the Stoics, the Epicureans, it is very important to understand that this is a universal theory. It is not a specific theory that says eudaimonia is something that only a particular demographic can have access to. Everybody has access to eudaimonia. In fact, specifically, Aristotle makes it very clear that we cannot talk about a different eudaimonia for a male or for a female, for a man, for a woman, or for a child, or for a Greek or a non-Greek. There are no such divisions. It's really about the activity of the soul, the human soul. We are all born with a desire to know. So this is again something that happens in metaphysics, lambda. It's where we actually see Aristotle really build on that. But we as human beings have that ability to know, to understand, and to reach eudaimonia through virtuous action. And this is proposed as a universal theory for all humans. And that is why I believe today it is very urgent, I would say, to be able to talk about eudaimonia, because it is one of the concepts and virtuous action. They are these concepts where we can build a sense of common humanity and towards some kind of greater good that that transgresses, just national or group or tribal identities, but aims towards something more deep and more human at the core. I did want to say one more last thing.
Of course. Let's go back to it. Yes.
Yeah, about the Delphi cube, which I think it's a great idea.
Of course.
Yeah, and
yes.
it is said, I watched the little video that you sent me, and it is said to be like a sense-making tool. So I think of it as a method for guiding action towards eudaimonia and the common good. And I think it's very important that that concept of integration, again, it brings us back to the concept of phronesis and the concept of part of nature, which is nature in this larger sense. All these aspects of the cube are part of nature.
So in a way, part of human nature, part of our human nature.
Exactly. And our human nature is something that needs to be nourished in this integrated way. It's very important to have this integrated way, in order to be able to...
Would you even call it interdisciplinary? I know that, one of the values, the core values of the University of Chicago has always been this interdisciplinary core experience that it provides to students. And so do you also see that the concept of virtue and the concept of our common humanity also has an interdisciplinary nature, which would be an interesting point?
I believe that very strongly. It has an interdisciplinary nature, interconnected. In the Greek thought, we find a lot about the unity of knowledge, the unity of virtue. You cannot have one virtue and lack another. Aristotle makes that very clear in Nicomachean Ethics. So there is a sense of unity that comes from the different disciplines, the different pieces. And I think it's very important to emphasize this. If we want the cube to be a proposal about demos, okay, and if we want to have a demos, not just a collection of people living in a city or living in a country, but something integrated, the concept of demos or of polis. Again, the polis is not just a collection of tribes or a collection of people. It's an integrated collection of, it sounds almost like the founding of the United States, a pluribus unum. So from the many, you produce one that is an integrated, harmonically related society that educates the citizens towards this eudaimonia and flourishes. I think we go back in a way to the Aristotelian goal that the end of polis is eudaimonia, and it's the eudaimonia of its citizens, and that eudaimonia can only be developed and achieved if we have an integration of these different aspects, different disciplines of how to reach the good. And I think that's what I liked about the Delphi Cube, and I'm happy to to help in any way I can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Giannakidou.
And just one final thought. We want to thank Professor Giannakidou. So please, your round of applause is most welcome. And just as one final thought to kind of make sense of what took place in the discussion, I think if we think of the latest research nowadays in institutes like the Yale Institute for Happiness Studies, or if we look into Nobel laureates and the work of Nobel laureates like now President Muhammad Yunus with his book, The Three Zeros, a common thread that comes across through all of those research papers is that we can link our happiness with the happiness of the society, with the happiness of the whole. Those of us who can, I think, have the obligation to do it. And of course, I know that it's difficult for some of us members in society, but those of us who can have an obligation to do it, because not only will our life be more meaningful, but we will actually also be able to have an impact in the world at large. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Achilleas, very, very much. Achilleas has been with us from the very first day in Delphi. And so thank you for bringing up the Delphi Cube with Professor Giannakidou. I'm not sure we should not have showed the Delphi Cube here before, but I think that's okay. Now I would like to turn over to Nicolas and ask him to speak a little bit more about the East and Eastern philosophies in relationship with our subject of today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for the invitation. It's an honor to be here and to be in this important and sacred place. And I want to thank the Human Forum for organizing this event and bring us together to talk about such beautiful issues and very, very important, like Evδαιμονία, how we can change our minds, how we can change, because I'm in the arts, how we can change our sensations in order to change the world. Because to be in the world is a kind of sensation. So allow me, as Greek and living many years in Asia, to talk a little bit about Aristotle and then to go to Taoism and to the Eastern way of philosophy through a completely different way. Not through the ethics, not through the political studies of Aristotle, but through his metaphysics. And how Aristotle gave us a way, through his metaphysical approach, to have a new vision, an Evδαιμonic vision, a new perspective. Okay, so allow me to go through this process from the West, let's say Greece, to the East, and I will try at the end to unite them as one, even they are different directions. They are looking in completely different directions. One is a philosophy of the marble, of the stone, the Greek, and then the Chinese philosophy is a philosophy of the water. So I will start about Elefsina and the mysteries of Elefsina in order to approach Aristotle through his metaphysics. So the mystery of Elefsina is the mystery of existence. In order, people come here in order to go underground, in order to meet the other world, to have a living perception of the other world. It's nothing to do about their destiny or what will happen to them when they will die and they will arrive to the underworld, but rather to have a perspective, an idea about what was going to happen to them. It's a living perception of the other world. Okay, so this attitude changed with the birth of the tragedy. The birth of the tragedy changed the mysteries of the Orphic mysteries, and transform them into a theater, into a new vision, into a theoretical vision. So it's not anymore a vision of the mystic, but rather it becomes a vision of a theoria, a theorization of the world. Pierre Hadot, in his book, What is Asian Philosophy, he brings us a new notion about philosophia. Contrary to the modern notion of philosophy that produces different discourses, Asian philosophy aimed to create a system of spiritual exercises that will transform the vision about the world, our vision about the world. So Hadot redefines how philosophy is perceived and sees it as a practical process which has to do with a transformation of vision. And Hadot says to us, every school, philosophical school in ancient Greece produces such spiritual exercises. And he relates these exercises with the notion of meletes and ascesis, denoting a kind of athletic as well as spiritual training. So, Aristotle's Lyceum was not just an institution for education, but rather it offered a space for study philosophy, physics, metaphysics, politics, and ethics. And this is a process that it aimed to produce through theorization. Aristotle's philosophy, it's a philosophy of theory, but be careful, not in the modern sense of the word, but rather it's a practice to see inside, to question the physical phenomena themselves. To start, Aristotle says to us that we should start questioning the physical phenomena, which means to study the relationship between matter and form. So for the Greeks, it's very, very important, the concept of the form, which is something different for the Asians. It's a philosophy of abstraction in the Asian world. And so we have, for Aristotle, we have to study the relationship between matter and form. Aristotle says to us, matter presents the potentiality that matter can take different forms. From the other hand, form presents us the actuality, the organization of matter, of how these two will come together to produce a whole, an organic whole. So for Aristotle, matter and form are infused inside, they are together. Where for Plato, form was high above, for Aristotle, matter comes down below and is inside matter. So we have an informed matter. Okay. Sorry, just an informed matter. And this produces a kind of modulation, a modulation of an internal mold. It's like a sculpture, a process of sculpturing. The world is made out of process of sculpturing, Aristotle says. And in order to understand this, we have to start theorizing the world, to see the world again as how form orders matter and creates an organic whole. And this process of internal molding is actually what the Greek art, the classical art, choose to produce as its main object of study. How form orders matter in order to produce an organic whole. Okay. As we can see here, in the Greek art, we have first the form that is worked out, and it directly depends on the counter. And once the form is dependent on the counter, it produces an organic whole. In Metopes of Parthenon, as we can see, the The process is produced from rising out from the counter, the form rises out of the counter and directly depends on the form. And here, okay, sorry, it's so many things I have to say. Let me read a little bit my essay. Okay, what we can find in Greek art is the opening of an organic whole, a sculptural organism produced from the distinction between the foreground, where form comes first, and the counter matter that comes afterwards. The counter directly depends on the form, and since the counter depends on the form, it constitutes an organic whole, an organism of unity. So in Metopes of Parthenon, figures rise out from the counter. Indeed, heads, muscles, and legs rise out from the counter and reach to a point which become completely detached, gaining their autonomy. What unites them is the modulation of a line. This is very important. What unites the organs is the modulation of a line produced from an internal mold. This process of modulation This process of modulation is processed in the reliefs. We can find the line in the reliefs, which are in the foreground, where form is worked out and determines its relationship with the counter. In fact, the Greek harmony entails a distribution of the highs and the lows, a harmony that gives us the sense that form rises from within, the lows and the highs and the shadow. The whole sculpture has different levels. Asian philosophy found in matter not an organic universe of forms, but a cosmic diagram of abstractions. For the Asians, what creates the world is a unity of forces that penetrates all aspects of life. Substance thus become an abstraction, an emptiness, as things rise out of the forces of nature and therefore have the potentiality to become another. Becoming is the being for Tao. Being is becoming, since being in life is an abstract event, a potentiality that folds both the organism and its environment as an internal unfolding. Life, thus, is an event that has twofold characters. On the one side, the inner forces of the mind, and on the other side, the outer forces of the world. This twofold aspect of life constructs a cosmic web, a skeleton of forces that unites all beings with their environment. For Tao, to become part of this cosmic web is an effortless action, which means to theorize and reflect upon the movement of things. This means to bring into focus those events and movements that constitute unity. In Tao, physical and spiritual development rises by theorizing and reflecting, and a sense of the vibrant unity of the world, the pulsation of the cosmos itself. This set of practices enable us to theorize and sense nature movements and relations and how we affect and be affected from the world. For Tao, to theorize the world is to make the world to flow. It is indeed a practice to transcend movement, to see the world again, to perceive it not as a formal representation of life, but as a flow of forces, a movement of unity that positions thought beyond its dualities of representative thought and open it to a new logic of sense, a sense that unites being with its cosmic breath. This unifying principle is Chi, which means the breath of nature. Spirit, sun, breath, Chi, and substance, Yin, represent three stages of manifestation of Tao. Spirit and substance are autonomous events, unified through the breath and its abstract forces. As Lao Tzu writes, through thought, the formless and the intangible, that the form rises, the spirit is the substance, the life breath of all things. It is what The breath of life is the event that brings things all together as one. It is what unites all things from within. It is the kind of universal ether that Lao Tzu describes. The breath of life moves through a deathless alley of Mr. Motherhood, which conceives and bears the universal seed, the seeming of the world never to end, breath for the people to draw from as they will, and the more they take of it, the more remains. And it is this element of breath of life that all things, and they will come together as one. And this element is water, is not the air. It is the water which creates the air, like a vapor rising out from the pot, like a breath. And to breathe means to flow, and to flow means to become an image of water. Water is for Chinese philosophy, is precisely the intervals of movement. To grasp the intervals of movement that appear as continuous in our ordinary perception. And it's through the interval that we obtain a blinking world, which is the vibration of matter, a microscopic molecular perception. It is the molecular perception of water, the molecular perception of the air, the molecular perception of movement, which means the world must flow in order to obtain a magnified image of its movement. Illumination in Taoism is realized in colossal dimensions. The world is enlarged, magnified, to reveal the connected lines that pass through all things to create the whole. The whole is expressed as a liquid image. It is only when we flow into the world, when we acquire a flowing perception, we can see the liquid image of the world. Artists of the 16th century expressed this Taoist principle of the liquid image by following two main principles. First, the painter has to set forth a spiral movement through brush strokes, which is the expression of the breath of life, the visible manifestation of essence of life. As you can see here, the painter takes his brush and he starts creating the painting by expressing the breath of life, like this, creating the spiral movements. So the painting starts by drawing and giving us this perception of the breath. Then the painter, and it is in this element of the breath of life, or the systole and the diastole of all things and all beings will start to appear and to become parts of its spiral movements. Things breathe in a cosmic breathing. But this is the first step of creation, since the painter must not only express the breath of life and its spiral movements, but also to draw out a skeleton. So, after he will start doing these brush strokes, he will start slowly finding the skeleton, how the one breath with the other breath will start to connect. And he will start creating the cosmic web, the fiber that unites all things. So the painter must not only express the breath of life, but also the skeleton, the line of the cosmic web of the universe, the fiber that connects two separate things or several separate beings all together. In Tao painting, the lines of the universe are no longer the great breath of life, but also the skeleton. And when the painter draws the skeleton, he has not only to connect things as they appear, but also as they disappear. As a mountain appear out from a mist. So the skeleton also is the part of the mist. The abstraction, the empty space is realized as a line that connects and makes things to appear. So, to conclude, and I'm sorry for a little bit my presentation because I had designed it in a completely different order, like as a speech, and I ended up like a... so I'm sorry for that. So, how the question here rises with urgency. How Asian metaphysics and Asian philosophy can help us to change our mind and change the world. In which ways we can change and develop our minds. And what we find from both Aristotle and Taoism is one unity, because both philosophies are completely different in the terms of element and how they approach the world. As I said, an image of water and an image of sculpture. But what unites them is the process to theorize and reflect upon how things rise. So what we need in our concept, and this process of theorization, Aristotle would say is the highest joy. Is a highest joy that we live by practicing a vios theoretikos. We need, for Aristotle, in order to reach a flourishing and an Evdαιμonic mind, we need to start theorizing the world and see a completely different, and to find a new perception into things. By doing that, the mind goes to an Evdαιμonic state. The highest virtues, Aristotle says, is to theorization. So Tao, at the same time, says to us that to see the world and to be Evdαιμonic in the world is an effortless action. It's an effortless action to reflect and sense the vibrant unities of the world, to find an image of unity, an image of harmony, where in classical arts, where in Greek arts, what we have, we have an image of opposition, the man and the centaurus, an image that rides out from the counter through an internal molding, and this process of the internal molding produces two different points of opposition, the animal human and the human that fight. But be careful, where is the unity? There is an image of unity inside that sculpture. And this image of unity is on the legs. Here, on this point, is the point of unity. An animal-human unity. Starting from opposition that unites them. The opposite, the man and the woman, that unites to create a birth. So what we need, I finish 1 minute. So what we need to change the world in our contemporary societies of information, of digital screens, that we are disconnected from the world, we need a new way to theorize the world. A new theory. That's what the Asians will say to us. To produce a new theory, a new process of theorization in order to change our perspective and to change the mind and to see another world of the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicola, and there's no doubt that philosophy and art do a wonderful work together. You mentioned Taoism, and we mentioned Aristotle, and I know we are almost at the time where we have our coffee break, and I would certainly advise you all to speak to Achilleas and Spyros and Nicolas outside of our coffee. Before we do that, we have a very small 5-minute video that introduces also another, of course, very important Chinese philosopher who is Confucius. We certainly don't pretend to anything more than to remind us of the existence of all those amazing people on this incredible knowledge that exists. Because personally, I have to admit, I have never studied philosophy, and I I imagine that many of you neither. So this is really done just to remind us of so many things that are around, and nothing more than that, okay? There's no pretension other than that. There are more than enough philosophers around, and meetings and books and podcasts and everything you need to know. But for us, what is important here is to bring all those elements together, and therefore a very small video. It has been done by Stefanos Gandolfo, who is a young Greek sinologist. He is now in New York. He was planning to be with us, but he has gotten a new job. He will direct the new Global Center of the University of Columbia in Greece, and therefore he was in New York for his induction. So he is with us from New York. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be part of the World Human Forum and its vibrant community, and I would like to thank Alexandra for the warm welcome. I'm excited to share with you some ideas I've learned from studying Chinese philosophy and how they can guide us towards human flourishing in the 21st century. We live in an age which is dominated by rapid change and constant technological advancement, and I think most of us overlook ancient texts as something irrelevant to learn something about how to actually lead our lives. This is even more the case with Chinese philosophy, which is often seen as a relic of the past, of a bygone era, mostly fixated on order and hierarchy, concepts that can feel very irrelevant to our lives today. As Michael Puett, professor of Chinese history and literature at Harvard, presents in his amazing book, which I full-heartedly recommend, titled The Path, many of us embark on a quest for a fulfilled and meaningful life, believing we can simply discover our true selves and authentically express who we are in order to attain human flourishing. In our current world, personality tests and algorithms claim to help us identify our true interests and guide us in making some of the most important decisions, like choosing a career or our romantic partners. The assumption behind this is that once we uncover our true selves, we can lead fulfilling lives. I would like to bring in Confucius and a different perspective, and one of his most powerful sayings goes something like this, that in order to become a good person, you must conquer yourself by submitting to rituals. And I'd like to repeat that in order to become a good person, one must conquer themselves by submitting to rituals. At first glance, this statement seems very different and perhaps irrelevant to our contemporary understanding of human flourishing, which places so much emphasis on liberation and self-discovery rather than submission. So, what can we unravel from this phrase? In the classical Chinese world, the self was perceived very differently from how we currently view it. Rather than assuming we possess a pre-existing perfected identity waiting to be uncovered, each of us is seen as a complex array of emotions, desires, thoughts, motivations, a beautiful mess, as Michael Puett calls it. And as babies, these multiple and chaotic energies interact with our environment and elicit specific responses. So if someone smiles to a child, then the baby will be happy and smile back. If someone shouts and is angry, the baby will be sad and cry. And in truth, we never really stop behaving in this way of automated responses to the world, which we just come to perceive as a fixed personality trait. And therefore, the first insight, perhaps, is the suggestion that our path towards human flourishing demands that we break free from these patterns that we just happen to call ourselves. And by breaking from these patterns, we can engage more meaningfully with our surroundings. And that's why rituals emerge as an essential component in this transformative journey. Because one might argue that rituals may merely trap us into more habits, yet they can serve a vital function in cultivating awareness and breaking free from entrenched behavioral cycles. And nowhere does this happen more clearly than in rituals of ancient China that engaged in role reversal in families or in communities, where the parent would assume the role of the child and vice versa, or the community leader would assume the role of a simple citizen and vice versa. And therefore, what is crucial to appreciate about these rituals is that they do not merely call us to assume the opposite perspective in theory and abstraction, but actually require us to play them out and to engage with the other person as if we were them. And therefore, by stepping outside our usual roles, we can redefine our relationships and gain clarity to the fact that the way we behave is just one pattern of behavior, which in turn opens the possibility of meaningful change. To flourish means more than simply accumulating successes. I think we can all agree on that. It is about cultivating the ability to perceive and engage with the world around us meaningfully. Goodness and flourishing emerge from genuine connections with others and our environment, and breaking free from the automated responses that often govern our lives. I think it is no coincidence that in classical Chinese the word for joy and music share exactly the same character. This seems to imply that joy as a form of human flourishing is somehow structurally similar to music, in the sense that music is a form of intentionally patterned sound. From this perspective, traditional Chinese culture has a profound sense of musicality, in believing not only in music's capacity to elevate us, to refine our emotions, and to communicate with each other at a universal level, but also, and perhaps more deeply, in music's ability to be the fundamental paradigm on which we build our life as a harmonious pattern of behaviors. And that's exactly in the same way that notes are the building blocks of music, so too are rituals the fundamental elements of life. Thus, what I'd like to suggest in closing is that by rediscovering this ancient perspective, we can break free from some assumptions which we have about human flourishing that have perhaps led us to some intellectual dead ends, and find instead a different path to a flourishing human existence. Thank you.
Well, indeed, we are just on time, so I will ask you to go out for a coffee break and engage with everyone you like, the speakers of this morning or anybody else, and then let's be back at 5 o'clock sharp, if possible, but we will chase you in, and then we continue for the second session of the afternoon. Thank you.